SimCity 3000 and SimCity 4 are some of my favorite simulation games ever made. And I've dedicated the last few years to using them as a breeding ground to experiment with the ultimate question for any political philosopher. How can we create the perfect utopia? So to cap off the year and bring together my research, I've compiled every challenge I've ever completed in SimCity from the very beginning. Some of them good, some of them bad, but most of them bad. Everything from a 0% tax city to a maximum tax city. A few attempts at creating an island paradise, and even building a city starting with $0. They're all here, edited and enhanced for your viewing pleasure. But I've compiled my adventures and misadventures for future city planners and people of the future to learn from my mistakes. But before the video, I'm very excited to announce that today I've been sponsored by Jagex for old school RuneScape. Since I'm coming back to replay and enjoy all these retro games, it bears mentioning. I love RuneScape. And I played so much of it as a child, as well as revisiting it over the last couple of years to work on my combat skill by fighting sand crabs and grinding up my attack and defense on the southern coast of Hosidius. There's been a lot of new content Jagex has been releasing for old school, and today I'm highlighting the latest event, Leagues 5 Raging Echoes. Leagues 5 is live now and runs until January. This event takes old school RuneScape gameplay to extreme new levels. Insane XP rates, incredible loot boosts, and relic power-ups that completely break the usual rules. But wait, there's also a competitive twist, with leaderboards tracking everyone's progress and high scores. With all this skill grinding, your head just might explode. So at times like this, I remind you that RuneScape is a fantastic choice for a second screen game. Ideal for playing while watching this video on YouTube, or gaming on another screen. League 5's setup makes it easy to make big progress while doing this type of multitasking. On a personal note, I cannot recommend old school RuneScape enough. And it's still just as good, nay, even better than it ever was. Click my link in the description to learn more, and download old school RuneScape to start your journey today. How much should we be taxed? It's no secret that many people dislike paying taxes, but what if there were another way? Would it be possible to create a fully functioning society without the need for any income tax? Today I decided to put this idea to the test in SimCity 4 by creating the first ever society to function completely without the need for any tax. So it all began with an experiment, the first city. I dubbed it No Taxalonia, and spawned into the blank landmass. Year zero, $500,000 in the bank's starting capital, and the dream of creating the perfect society with no tax. After placing the initial coal power plant to put our city on the grid, I was almost immediately confronted with a major problem. Who would pay for the power plant? It cost 100 simoleons a month to run, and we had absolutely no tax revenue. Or any source of money. But let's just forget about that for now, and keep going anyway. I built farms to sustain the food supply, then padded in commercial and residential zones at the center. And right before anyone moved into town, I lowered the taxes all to 0%. No Taxalonia was open for business, and demand soared right from the start. People marched like ants into the burgeoning city in droves, cresting a population of 1,000 after only 1 year. Unfortunately though, they didn't have any money, and they didn't give us any money, and so we had no money. Or at least, no money coming in. We still had what was left over from what I'd already built. Very quickly, it became apparent nothing pays for itself, especially power and transportation maintenance. So, right from the start, our budget was already in the red, losing 330 simoleons per month. But for now, let's just continue to ignore that. After all, we still have $460,000 of our starting capital left in the bank. There's plenty of breathing room here. If we couldn't make money from tax, we'd need to resort to alternative means to obtain civic revenue. As a potential solution, the city ordinance to legalize gambling offered a potential state revenue of 100 simoleons per month. An opportunity at some free cash flow. We signed the deal, nearly balancing the budget, but unfortunately, it still wouldn't be enough to cover the costs of both power and transportation in our city. So naturally, we decided to abolish funding for the transportation department entirely. As a consequence, potholes appeared the next day on every inch of paved road throughout the town, leading to traffic accidents, unhappy advisors, and the baffling fading away of automobiles into nothingness. I just continued to ignore most of these issues, though. Lots of people were now unemployed and couldn't get to work since the roads, now freckled with potholes, were impossible to navigate. So everyone just stayed at home. In the meantime, I continued expanding the city with more farms along the periphery. When my advisors expressed their differing opinions, I just ignored them and continued building. When there was a fire on the edge, I ignored it until it burned down a whole city block. We didn't need that block anyway. The city grew, cresting a population of 5,000 people and rising. Everything seemed good until we started running out of electricity from the power plant. Unfortunately, with a budget of only $100 per month, we were unable to supply the power plant with enough voltage to power everyone's homes. And so, faced with the dire reality of an underfunded city, we made the difficult choice of funding only $100 worth of electricity each month. From the money, of course, that we'd got from legalizing gambling. This seemed like a good idea, rationing power usage. But here's where I'm ashamed to admit that it wasn't a good idea. So we turned the power on and off, expelling and ushering back in our population, leading to a Sisyphean series of brownouts, which was, fortunately, in the end, enough to bring back the original population of 5,000 people to live in a perpetual state of the lights flickering on and off for the remainder of their unemployed existences, staring out their windows at an array of potholes, preventing their escape. And so, relatively satisfied, but also now stagnant in our town's growth, I decided to put city number 1, No Taxalonia, on the shelf for a while I pondered the lessons from my time as mayor to set out on a new embarkment, on an improved version of my utopian society. So I began again and dubbed its neighbor City number 2, Freedonia, the better version of our tax-free city. A clean slate and starting fresh again at year 0 with all the lessons from my first city in mind, I embarked on the construction of Freedonia. If No Taxalonia had failed because it had no plan for making money, well, Freedonia would rise like a phoenix reborn out of its ashes. We started off Freedonia with wind instead of coal power, which we were now actually able to fund. And learning our lessons from the first city, we spaced out our homes and factories far enough apart so that fire couldn't spread and burn down the whole city again. These were good ideas, but still, we needed more money. But how? Well, with a little critical thinking, if we can't tax our people, we can put them to work. So I zoned in the center of our town a massive landfill for the storage of garbage. Freedonia, come dump your crap here. That is to say, since we had nothing else to offer, we volunteered our land to storing away other people's garbage from nearby towns, including, of course, our neighboring city of No Taxalonia, which still had a lot of issues. So, seizing opportunity, we struck cash deals with our neighbors to take their garbage off their hands and pile it into our dump for a monthly payment. And so, seemingly overnight, with our business plan hatched, we had a mountain of crap all in our midst, lending us a lucrative new income stream of over $500 a month. It was brilliant. The only flaw in the plan was now we had a massive mountain of trash located directly in the middle of our city. Generally speaking, people don't like living next to the dump. What to do? You can't simply bulldoze garbage in SimCity, that's not allowed. So instead, I decided that we might opportunistically utilize the strategic positioning of the dump and lack of fire departments, but this time for the sake of civic redevelopment. That is to say, we zoned densely packed, hazardously flammable industrial zones all surrounding the garbage dump in the hopes that their businesses would, burn themselves down along with the garbage. It was foolproof, if a bit immoral. But, in the end we did it for the greater good of the town, and I think that's all that matters. With the new money and development, we erected even more wind turbines for power. Everything was going swimmingly, all according to plan. Of course, that is, until an actual fire broke out and, well, it failed to burn down the garbage. That's when I realized that, as it turns out in SimCity 4, garbage is unfortunately fireproof, impervious to flames, which ultimately is too bad because that was my whole plan, and it would have been a pretty awesome exploit to pull off. City number 3. After a brief attempt to salvage and even gentrify city number 2 with an exciting bus stop, I ultimately abandoned Fredonia to the winds of time alongside its misfit neighbor, Notaxalonia. So, with all the tuition paid from these first 2 tax-free cities, I set out once again with renewed resolve and determination. They say the third time's the charm, and I was determined that this would be the greatest city of them all. The result of all my lessons and failures poured into the ultimate town, perfect in every way. The third city. We learned so many lessons from the first 2 failures that this town had to work. It all began, of course, with the construction of wind turbines for affordable power. And then, of course, residential, commercial, and industrial zones, all spaced so that fires couldn't spread between them in the unplanned event of a conflagration. Check and check. All our valuable lessons imported from past city failures. But this time, we also added in toll booths to nickel and dime our residents on their way to work. It's not taxation because they choose to go to work instead of staying at home. Not that the roads were very good. I mean, we'd made maybe a couple dollars every month on the tolls too. But it all adds up. Line it in with a huge trash dump once again to start taking garbage off our neighbors' hands for a small cash sum each month. And before you know it, we've got a whole lineup of money-making schemes implemented. The only problem with the garbage collection this time was that since our neighboring cities were just so full of crap from the last few hundred years, we were overwhelmed by a large, unsightly, and above all, more expensive pile of garbage than it was worth taking on. That is to say, the trash neighbor deal was trash. It not only lost us thousands of dollars, but also buried our city in a mountain of crap. So, to make it look like we were still trying, we shut down funding for our own sanitation department. Overall, netting $1 a month for agreeing to pick up our neighbor's garbage, but then never actually showing up to pick it up every day. Profit. From here, the city expanded. More zoning, more toll booths. When someone's house went on fire accidentally, we destroyed their neighbors' homes. But we did it for the greater good of the town. And if you're that dumb, you probably just don't deserve to live here anyway. Next, we tried gentrifying the town with bus stops, but that didn't work either. Ultimately, the way things were going, I could see that everything was beginning to roll along at a very slow trickle financially. The truth was that if we wanted access to the real moneymakers, we'd have to put a big hole in our budget. And so, in an effort to spur federal investment, I built a ton of power plants and wasted all of our money to anger the city accountant and strike up a deal with nuclear to allow the building of a hazardous missile experimentation silo in the middle of our town, right next to the dump. Naturally, we welcomed the $450 a month payments with open arms. This was, in fact, more money than any of our elaborate Ponzi business ventures had earned us to date. Which, of course, naturally got me thinking again. You know, maybe if people aren't willing to pay for a city, maybe they don't deserve a city. That's not to say that the accidental nuclear strike of 2055 on our residents was an inside job. Of course not. That was an accident. I would never, ever intentionally launch a nuclear missile at innocent people's homes in order to oust them from our 0% tax paradise and make way for an array of state-sponsored lobbyist corporations to open doors on nuclear testing and toxic waste dumps. I would never do that, of course. Would I? Well, I guess it's up to you and the remaining 5 residents of No Tax City to decide that for yourselves. I am morally justified. I did what I had to for the greater good. Now, No Tax City is stable and profitable, netting $900 of profit a month. I believe that I have the moral high ground. Welcome back. For years, political philosophers and economists have asked, how much tax is too much? In today's video, I decided to explore this question with an experiment in SimCity 4 to create the perfect society. The question? What is the greatest tax burden people would be willing to bear in order to contribute to the common good? I decided to begin by entering the region with all my other cities, some of which had succeeded, while others had failed. This time to create a new attempt at utopia. MAX TAX City. January 1st, year 0. A city was born. Well, it wasn't a city yet, just a bunch of dirt and water, but where to begin? 100,000 simoleons, 0 population. Demand was high, and that was a start. But there was one problem. Taxes were too low. Only 9%. It just wasn't enough. So after I paved a road and built the obligatory coal power plant to secure our main energy source, I raised the taxes from 9 to 20% in the spirit of the challenge for every sector of town. There might not be any sectors in the town yet, but there wasn't a town, and that was the plan. Where to begin? Agricultural demand was high, and so was residential. So I zoned farms around the periphery, planning to build wide and then establish residences in the middle of town. Only problem was that once I zoned everything, demand it died. It immediately died once everyone heard about the tax hikes. So this was the first problem I would encounter as mayor. Literally, no one will pay their taxes. I even waited a whole year, and not a single soul moved into the town. Oddly enough, my advisors thought everything was totally fine, and they're even slightly happy. I found this stupid and offensive. Usually my advisors were mad at me when I had a town, but there were no hospitals, or we were massacring the environment. Idiots. When I tried attracting more citizens into the town by building municipal services, then my advisors started getting testy with me again for no reason. The fire chief was upset. He was always upset, but that's beside the point. This time he was upset that we weren't covering the whole town's fire radius. But there wasn't a town. It was just the fire station. Well, there were a few other buildings. There was an elementary school, a police station, a museum, even a whole college campus. All just for literally no one. I piped water in for no one. In the end, by year 5, we had lost all of our money, no one lived here, and all my advisors were unhappy about the baffling financial situation of the town that never was. So I got offered a toxic waste dump to build across the river. But even that couldn't save me because people they hate taxes so much they don't want public goods at all, and they'd probably prefer living in a nuclear fallout zone or like a DMZ if it meant they didn't have to pay taxes. I had utterly failed, but I still felt good about myself. I mean, I had, after all, followed the spirit of the challenge to a T. The taxes were maximized, but it was time to try again and maybe alter the parameters at first. Sure, maybe we couldn't start out the city with maximum tax, but what if there was some other way? A way to start out slow with false expectations and then slowly rug pull my entire population by gradually taxing the hell out of them. And so I hatched my next set of plans. Seemingly overnight, the whole city was reborn from the ground up. Max Tax City, attempt number 2. Okay, so if 20% tax didn't work, then what about 19% tax? A first attempt, it didn't look like it would work. Negative 6,000 demand, across the board. But I tried it anyway, legalizing gambling, except that I wasn't allowed to legalize gambling until I had built a single road, presumably for people to gamble on. $100 of income per month. Progress. Gambling and a road. This town was already profitable. But how could I induce demand somehow? A profitable city where no one lives maybe isn't all that exciting. What about 18% tax? No. 17? No. 16. Nothing really was working. So I kept trying smaller and smaller numbers, but still nothing worked. And just no one wanted to live here. Yet. The default tax percentage is 9, so I moved my way down. 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, and 10. Counting by whole numbers, at last at number 9, demand returned, and fast. 6,000 demand. But like I said, 9% is the default tax, so This isn't really much of a max tax city, this is just a normal tax city now. Could we start it out at a higher number? What would they think of 9.1%? Outrageous success. And so I conducted a binary search algorithm. Could we go all the way up to 9.5%? If 9 was an acceptable tax percentage and 10 was unacceptable, how high could we go between the two numbers while still keeping demand? Could we go to 9.5? No, definitely not. That caused an abysmal negative 4,000 demand, but we're getting somewhere. So finally, after trying 9.2 and 9.4%, I arrived at the Goldilocks tax number, 9.3%. The highest possible tax number where people would still agree to live here without complaining and pay the taxes. There was only one problem. With only one road, there was still considered to be no road access because the first road wasn't touching another piece of road. And so I did it. I built another road, and then finally, at long last, civilization could flourish. The first Sim home. 5 people lived in our town. What followed was incredible. After lowering all taxes to 9.3%, I zoned the lands for dirty industry along the periphery of the city so that the pollution would just exit the map off the sides. Demand was high, and seemingly overnight, smokestacks appeared on the skyline, and the way for civilization was paved. Max Tax City. We had 8,385 jobs, but no one living there. You know, at this point in time, I gotta say, I look back at the city and, having people in your city is overrated. If you build just a giant sweatshop and fill the whole land with factories, that's fine. There was development and a ton of pollution, but there was no one there to complain about it. Only one of my advisors was upset about the lack of power plants. An easy fix. The fire chief kept freaking out since the factories naturally kept setting on fire. But for the first time, I was actually able to placate him by putting fire departments all around the town. Now this was insanely profitable. Now that the factories had built up the town, I gradually began to raise the taxes. And factories aren't needy like people. They just keep going. No one wants dirty industry in their town, so if you allow them at all, they'll pretty much just pay anything you want. And gradually, even to my own surprise, I was able to hike tax rates to 10, 11, 12, then 15, and even 20%, and they just stayed there. If you start the factories off at 20%, they won't really want to move in, but if you rug pull them, like I said before, then they'll be okay with that. So then I just let everything go. I gradually kept replacing the power plants with more power plants to prevent them from blowing up. At that, I checked the pollution. Not good. And then I left my computer running in the simulation for 260 years. No one ever lived there, and I raised $40 million. Technically, I had accomplished my goal more or less, an immensely profitable city where everyone paid the maximum taxes, and we were able to fund the fire department so copiously that flames never broke out. I completed some errands away from my computer for a few hours and just left it there, and when I returned, money in hand, I decided to blow up the city. I mean, it looked like a city, but no one lived there, so I felt like it was against the spirit of the challenge, and I couldn't live with that. Block after block of merciless, pointless bulldozing. It all revealed that there was an immense pileup of crap all over the land. And then I flattened the earth. I zoned more land for high-tech industry and power plants, but dirty industry moved in there anyway, so I raised taxes on them again, and then individually blew up each of their businesses again. Then I built parks in each of the patches of land to prevent them from ever coming back. Gradually, we cleaned up all the garbage by burning it and sending it into the atmosphere, clearing space for houses where crap had once occupied the land. Now was the time. Now I could use my $40 million from sweatshop factory money to make life better for just this small group of people. We built homes and services. Thousands poured in as we could use the money to finance schools, hospitals, libraries, museums, flourishing with common prosperity. I could bump up taxes in a society of communist love. I built multiple replicas of the Empire State Building in the middle of residential neighborhoods to show that we were doing pretty well. I had a lot of money. Sure, maybe no one had jobs, but they did have a replica of the Taj Mahal. Maybe I went a little far, though. Things started to feel a bit mismatched. At this point in time, I walked away from my computer and I forgot to save my game, so I had to do it all over again. Schools, services, running water. I funded every sector of our economy liberally to make sure that everyone had all the resources they needed to succeed. Gradually, since there weren't enough jobs for poor and stupid people, the poor and stupid people just died out. And rich people moved into town who were smarter and got better paying jobs. That's right, I killed off edged out the poor. Then I momentarily dipped taxes on high-tech industry to bait them in so that we could create more high-paying jobs. All toward the goal of trapping a population of rich people in our town so I could tax the hell out of them. My plan was working. As taxes fell, high-tech industry moved in, further supporting our impossibly expensive public services and bringing more and more of the rich into the city center. The town grew and grew. Everyone got smarter and smarter, getting higher and higher paying jobs, and I kept raising taxes on the people I didn't want in town. The poor, the dirty. I used the money to build the Empire State Building again. And then finally, it was time to raise taxes at last, upon the rich. Now that I had trapped them and created their own personal utopia. They wouldn't leave, would they? Our society was perfect. Raise taxes to the max on the rich. And then something I didn't expect. The rich people didn't just live with it like the poor and dirty industry people had to pay all their taxes. They just started leaving town one by one. They abandoned all the buildings until MAX TAX City was but a shadow of its past. All the buildings lay in abandonment and ruin. And I guess that the moral of the story is that, well, rich people don't pay taxes, making this challenge almost entirely impossible unless you surrender yourself to creating a nation of sweatshops. And I think that's where all the money's at in government. Anyway, that's what I think would happen if you created a MAX TAX City in SimCity 4. In this video, I'm going to try to build an entire city starting from a tiny island in SimCity 3000. Survival Island is a challenge that has always invited a sense of adventure with the slow, measurable ticking of progress. Day by day, the island grows, all against the blank canvas of a vast and endless sea in all directions. Perfectly trapped. Like growing a tree from seed, branching out to reach new and exciting proportions. I could have picked SimCity 2000 or SimCity 4, but today I decided to revisit the awkward middle child of Will Wright's brilliant game design. So I embarked with my attempt at the first city in the year 2000. It all began on January 1st, 10,000 simoleons in the bank, and 9 grass cubes available for building space. If we were going to build a city, we'd need to power it somehow. And since the coal, oil, and natural gas power plants seemed too large and awkward to fit on the landmass, I commenced by building a single wind turbine. Clean, fresh, green technology. With power secured, then we started to fill the ocean with dirt so that we could build industries and housing around it, all connected by just a few small roads. Unfortunately, the wind turbine wasn't very good, and we almost immediately ran out of power. Since the wind power wouldn't be enough, we soon found ourselves building a coal power plant with all the new room and the last remaining money. And although it polluted the ocean with poop stain, it was more than enough to power our burgeoning metropolis. So in the years 2001 and 2002, the town expanded. We filled more of the ocean with more dirt and built more residential developments on top. Everything seemed hunky-dory, but unfortunately what set out with good intentions quickly turned south. Since the coal power plant was so dirty, the homes around it turned into slums due to the high pollution. Then at the start of 2003, just out of nowhere, a whirlpool opened up in the ocean. Just as quickly as it appeared, the whirlpool disappeared harmlessly. From 2004 to 2005, the town's footprint grew, inching forth in all directions and expanding. Our industries and housing projects increased. But then in 2006, an unexpected brown cloud of toxic pollution descended in our midst and destroyed the homes of everyone living next to the coal power plant. A tragedy. A shame. But we'd recover, though. It had destroyed only a few people's houses. But we actually didn't recover, since the giant toxic cloud of 2011 was what really did us in. It rained poop directly down on the coal power plant, reducing it to rubble, shoring up our bank accounts and eliminating all hope of ever coming back from the huge financial setback. And so the whole city descended into blackouts and ruin. Everyone died. The end. Okay, so back to the drawing board. The first city didn't work out, but we learned our lesson, right? So what about the second island city? So we embarked with the same challenge on attempt number 2, keeping in mind all the lessons we'd learned from part 1. The second city. The second city, much like the first, commenced construction on January 1st, 2000. To avoid future death from toxic poop clouds, we instead invested our starting capital in the much cleaner, yet still reliable, natural gas power plant. But we kept the thing far away from us at arm's length, separating the town itself from the power plant via the way of a long, straight land bridge to keep the people safe from any potential poop interference. You know the drill. Residential, commercial, and industrial zones. The town grew again. From 2000 to 2001, we collected 98 simoleons in tax from our residents. We reinvested those tax funds into filling the ocean with more dirt and paving way for new residential zones to make way for yet more taxpayers. Year by year, we collected more and more money and expanded our island's footprint. So from 2002 to 2010, that was our grind set. Collect the taxes, fill the ocean with dirt, and zone land for new housing. Thus we rose on an upward trend. This all despite the unnerving miss from the bizarre water tornado of 2011, which just remained off the coast innocuously. It seemed we had circumvented the disasters that had destroyed the first city. But eventually, however, a new disaster struck. It was the Great Fire of 2013. We didn't have a fire department. We couldn't afford a fire department. Unfortunately, fire is hot. Everyone died again. Now we had no money left, not even enough to demolish buildings in the fire's path before it spread, so everyone burned. But we recovered. Thanks to the brilliant strategy of keeping the power plant separate from the town, it took only a few years to clear all the debris back out, and by 2015, we were back on our feet. But still, we would need more money if we were going to grow the city. So in 2016, a toxic waste disposal plant offered us 400 simoleons a month to build their site in our city. And despite our previous bad experiences with toxic waste destroying the power plant in the town, this seemed like a pretty good offer. And so I agreed to build the site, but only far off away to the other side of the power plant this time, separate from the town. And after a little preparation, in 2021, at last we opened the doors to the toxic waste plant. Finally, a steady source of income. But it actually wasn't a steady source of income since they decided to just not pay us. They had lied. Then there was an earthquake, and then there was another toxic cloud over the town. No matter, it didn't destroy our power plant. Well, that is, it didn't destroy our power plant until the UFO alien invasion of 2026. The whole town was powerless. Maybe we could survive fires, earthquakes, pollution clouds, and even scammy toxic waste companies, but alien invasions were something for which we simply hadn't prepared. Everyone was abducted. And so, with a heavy heart, I decided to scrap the second city, blacked out and literally powerless. But at the same time, optimistic and much wizened for my third attempt at the third city. They say the third time's the charm. This time, I'd make a city that could survive fires, earthquakes, tornadoes, toxic poop clouds, scams, and UFO invasions. But how? So, after a little critical thinking, I decided that a decentralized power system would be the best aid in helping us dodge any potential disasters. And so I embarked once again on January 1st, but this time using the starting capital to construct a grid of wind turbines. Maybe the aliens could abduct one or two of them, but they certainly couldn't take them all with this more robust formation. And it was all connected by an array of cheap and inexpensive power lines that would all be easy to replace. And to prevent the spread of fires throughout the city, I stopped clumping together all the buildings, but instead decided to separate out each zone in checkerboard-like fashion, making it cheap and easy to prevent the spread of fires by just demolishing a few buildings, especially considering the complete absence of any fire department whatsoever. And so with foundations laying out, by the middle of 2003, we had sprouted the seed of what was someday destined to become a bustling metropolis. Year by year, we expanded out our infrastructure of each island to reach new checkerboard squares, open to growth, yet safe from potential disaster. And even though the wind turbines weren't yet strong enough, we kept stringing them along to build more of them as we filled yet more of the ocean beneath with dirt. All this as the population rose, cresting 2,000 people in the year 2006. And so at last, in the year 2010, the first fire broke out and tested our infrastructure. But sure enough, with the timely demolition of every building in a 4-tile radius, we prevented the spread of the flames to the rest of the city. You might be asking yourself, is this a moral infringement of individual rights? Maybe. But we did it for the greater good, and that's that. And so, with a rush of confidence in our robust new civil engineering protocols, we continued to expand the town, evading the pitfalls from even new and completely unexpected disasters, like the meteor shower of 2012, which passed us by innocuously. The city enlarged, and disasters were unable to spread beyond 1 square block of development, helping us to avoid what would have otherwise been certain doom. And sure enough, we even made it through the second flying saucer invasion of 2028, when the aliens abducted only 2 of our wind turbines, leaving the rest of the town largely unscathed. And so the city grew, square by square, with residential, commercial, and industrial islands as the power grid expanded to accommodate the new development. All up until eventually, in the year 2040, we'd at last raised enough taxpayer money to undertake the construction of a long, narrow land bridge from the center of the town to the upper edge of the map. This would grant us our first major opportunity at industrial expansion. The edge of the map is key here, since it's the best place to build your dirty factories in SimCity. Utilizing this method, half your pollution just disappears off the map edge for, someone else to deal with. Now the town could grow, at long last anchored in its infrastructure to something solid. And nothing could shake us, not even the meteor shower of 2048, nor the sea tornado of 2051. And as we continued to survive and thrive, we stretched out more of our factories along the map edge to create more jobs, but also keep pollution out of our homes. As the century marched on, we continued developing the town, establishing civic services to attract people in, and then getting rid of them when we realized they were too expensive to maintain. So the city grew to massive new proportions, and whatever it took to grow. Whenever there was a fire, we kept just destroying all the buildings around it. A fire department, after all, would be too expensive. After a while, though, it became apparent that no one wanted to move into our town anymore. So be it. We would just take their money. So then I spent the years from 2100 to 2172 ignoring everything and doing nothing. We ignored the meteor shower of 2137, and we ignored the Great Fire of 2146. But at the end of it all, we had collected over 800,000 simoleons in taxpayer revenue from over a century of doing nothing. So at last, in the year 2173, we decided to use the last 100-some-odd years of taxpayer revenue to fill in the rest of the ocean with dirt. Finally, we had overcome our plight of being trapped on a desert island, subjected to the fickle whims of Mother Nature. Now there was plenty. Now there was land for development. Now there was time. The population, after all, had been hanging around 85,000 Sims for the whole last century. How do we get those last 15,000 Sims to migrate to our city and call this metropolis their home? So with 60,000 simoleons to spare, I lowered taxes dramatically to attract people in to 3, 2, 1, and then 0% tax. At last, in the year 2189, our population crested 100K, achieving our rightful place as metropolis. Unfortunately, as a result of these actions, the town went horribly bankrupt and everyone died. In the end, and that, my friends, is the story of the island city. Because everyone knows that if I continue with the city, it'll just turn into Magnasanti.
EA Games.
Challenge everything. In this video, I'm going to build an entire civilization from this one dot of land. Most of the time when you play SimCity, you start off with a big forest. But I thought, that's boring. So instead we're going to play this like it's Raft and we're on a survival island. You need to expand to stay alive. The hardest mode in SimCity 4 starts you off with $100,000. I got to work. First off, we have to actually make the map. SimCity 4 was from 2004. We don't have any fancy building editors in this game, so instead we're going to use earth science to manipulate the land masses. This tile is the most watery on the regional map. There are my old cities: Indianapolis, Audianapolis, Rytopia, and Big Sneeze. But Dot Island would be different, forged from millions of years of the emergence of subaquatic magma spewing out of the earth, cooling, hardening, and then majestically eroding into a smooth-brained island, ready for man to seed its shores. I entered mayor mode and began. Attempt number 1. The first thing we needed was power. I resolved not to pollute, because pollution is sin. No, instead I opted for these nice boy wind turbines, mean and clean. Okay, next. The city needs people to live in it, so I zoned homes. But how would residents migrate to Dot Island? Call me a crazy city person, but my first idea was giant subway. I mean, boat terminals don't fit anyway here. Conveniently, the subway did actually work, and some crazy people were moving in. Industrial zone to work in, commercial zone to shop in, yet even more residential zones, and then I was completely out of room. Expand. The island grew, but it was also, completely destroyed. And bankrupt. I had made the unfortunately naive mistake of forgetting that using terraforming tools in SimCity 4 is like smiting everyone in your path with an instant death earthquake. Attempt 2. Just an island full of windmills. Nope. That didn't work either. After 37 seconds, I was faced with the unfortunate realization that wind turbines, the primary inhabitants of my island, are not people. Okay, third time's the charm. How about looking at all our resources? This is a hard challenge. We have almost no land, a bit of money, but also infinite time ahead of us, and lots of space. What about, instead of just taking Dot Island as face value, how about we prepare our canvas a bit more before we start painting? That can never hurt. So I grew out the edges of Dot Island enough so that when I expanded, I wouldn't destroy civilization. $15,217 later, and it was a comfortable square. And instead of bankrupting our town with wind power, this time, how about just 5 of them instead? I already knew I wanted to punch the town out square by square like graph paper, so I encircled my structure with avenues and added water, the lifeblood of our town. Also expensive. But as it turns out, terraforming is just a bit cheaper than expected, and if you're not accidentally destroying the entire town every 5 minutes, you have ample room to stay organized. No more of these hills and sandbars, rather than just a collection of huts, a residential square, a commercial row, an industry lane. I watered and piped everything, but then made the unfortunate realization that my town was again doomed to fail right from the start. Our people were dumb as a box of rocks, and they weren't even covering the city expenditures with taxes. How can I describe this? At the beginning, you're basically running down the budget, trying to generate a profit. It's like trying to land a crashing plane. What could I do for positive cash flow? Elementary school? Maybe it would bring in smarter brains. Not enough time. I had to balance the budget fast, or after only 1 year we'd be in a world of doo-doo. So I opened my Excel spreadsheets and began performing fiscal policy. We raised taxes on the poor and the dirty, since they couldn't pay as much as everyone else. Now we were back in the positive cash flows it was only 6 or 7 simoleons a month, but it's something. What about when disaster struck? When a fire broke out? Defund the fire department? It became a rallying political cry. Or the less popular but more effective, destroy the fire department. Or equally effective, just let the whole block burn down. That worked too. People weren't getting educated fast enough to make a difference, so I deceptively baited manufacturing industries to settle in our town by first lowering the tax rate, coercing them in, and then raising it back up again once they were all inside. Once they were trapped, then it would be financial suicide to leave. I smackledorfed them. We cut back on expenditures. Can't make me pay for burst pipes if there aren't any pipes to burst. And we force everyone to just drink the mysterious groundwater. I'm not saying that I'm proud, but I did what was necessary to get that city out of poverty. Even if that meant 84 years of squirreling away about $100 a month, all just to save the $67,000 needed to turn our back on our previous clean energy founding principles. That's right, forsake the wind turbines for cheaper coal power, and pour enough dirt into the ocean to establish farming on what used to be water. And so that's what we became. A community of stupid, uneducated farm people, barely raising enough taxes each year to continue filling the ocean around our island with dirt, all just to make more farms and keep filling up even more of the ocean with dirt. I'm not bragging about it, I'm saying that for the next 200 years, the local government collected more money to keep doing this. In the year 431, we'd finally filled in just about the entire ocean with dirt. Yep, that was it. My god, it took long, but we were technically still an island. I mean, just look at it. That's an island. Never to betray our spiritual beginnings. Strangely, we had become skilled at sucking money out of farmers, and honestly, it only made sense to let the simulation keep running for another 200 years, because I knew what was coming next would be very, very expensive. And I would have one good shot at it. That's right, one clean execution. So I passed the time, another 200 years, until year 600, I'm not kidding you, 600, when I finally began making moves at the metropolis of my dreams. With over 4 million simoleons, we had filled our coffers. 600 years of ad hoc fire departments. 600 years of garbage lying in the streets. Air pollution. Homeschooling. But it was highly profitable. My first act in the new plan was to, destroy the entire town. Formulate an elaborate Venn diagram of schools, elementary and high. A robust system of water pipage, and replan the entire town, bit by bit, with residential and commercial zones. Those made the juicy core. On the outskirts, I situated all the pollution so that it would be, other people's problems and not ours. Things were going splendidly, and the smooth-brained citizens were gaining wealth and getting smarter and smarter. But as is the law with all progress, anytime you want to build something nice, someone's rights need to be taken away. I'm not saying I make the rules, I just understand them. The fact was that the town was spending too much money, and we still had space for denser housing, but there was too much air pollution to build skyscrapers on the outskirts of the city. So I destroyed all the factories where people were working while they were inside, and raised taxes to prevent them from ever coming back. In a phrase, it worked. Pretty soon we had only clean high-tech and manufacturing jobs, 5-head, wrinkly-brained people working in our industries, living in high-rise apartments and buying lavish, expensive dinners to support the commercial industry. We privatized education, because ain't nobody got time for that. But by the year 641, I had admittedly a small existential crisis. We'd come all this way, but were we really still an island? After all, generation upon generation had seen nothing but dirt underfoot. So I came to the decision that I had to return to our spiritual island roots. We had done enough to the ocean by filling it with dirt. It was time to atone for my crimes by reconciling the edges. A decision which is notoriously the last one you'll ever make if you play SimCity 4. How could this happen? Whenever I play SimCity, I feel torn between two competing, often divergent goals. The first one, doing a genuinely good job, building a city that's actually profitable and sustainable, usually just flat land. I took a hard left into this one this time. And two, building a city that makes geographic sense with the surrounding regions. Maybe it was all doomed from the start. Reconciling the edges to make physical sense with neighboring grid squares is something I do that deeply pleases something in my soul. But it also causes catastrophic loss of human life to placate the ocean. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I did it just to say I did it. But I think in the end, I did it for you. Because I wanted to please you. Because I love you. I love you very much. Are you pleased now? Are you pleased with the screaming? With their unexpiated tears of agony falling down toward the underworld? I bet you are, you sick son of a bitch. Anyway, this has been a fun little experiment. EA Sports. Big.
Greetings, fellow gamers.
In today's video, I'm going to build a city for $0 in SimCity. Traditionally, in SimCity 4, you have money to start. Invest in roads and houses, collect taxpayer money, and invest in more roads and houses. Instead, today we're going to explore the seamy underbelly of the many exploits and loopholes built into this amazing game to make a city from literally nothing. So grab your popcorn and hold onto your hat, because here we begin at year 0. The hardest difficulty started me off on day 1 with the minimum $100,000 starting money. The first step toward beginning the challenge was to get rid of the money, since it's against the spirit of a $0 challenge to have money. Done. Now that we were really starting from 0, the next step was to figure out how to get money again. But how the heck do you make money when you don't have any? We're not playing hot dog stand tycoon after all. Normally in SimCity, tax revenue is collected from residents. But what if we can't build residences in the first place since we don't have any money to start? Without taking out a loan, which I honestly think is against the spirit of this challenge, that leaves us with a few other income strategies. We can't charge for transportation since we just don't have any. We can't even make any deals with our neighbors, since we have no municipal services to offer them whatsoever. That leaves us with business deals, which we'll get to in a second, but really, the one I want to focus in on is city ordinances, where our strategy of minting money out of thin air really begins. Ordinances, after all, are city-wide policies which create either monthly income or expenses. Policies like a smoke detector program to help prevent disastrous fires in our city. A small expense, to be sure, but hopefully helpful in preventing tears later on. Now, the simplest solution to this challenge would be to just legalize gambling. For some reason, you can make $100 a month extra by just ticking this box in the settings. Yes, a forest and a river where gambling is legal. Highly profitable. But I think that would be a stupid way to start. So instead, we're going even deeper into the red. So we enacted every single policy for our non-existent city. Carpool incentives. There weren't even cars. Tire recycling. Paper waste reduction. Need I say any more? It was all very expensive and completely unnecessary. My advisors were livid with my fiscal policy decision-making. Broke and penniless. It seemed that Loser City was doomed right from the start. My disapproving accountant lady appeared, this time with an offer. We could bail ourselves out by signing the first business deal. Business deals are scripted events in SimCity, and they're kind of like pacts with the devil. Losing money? Just sign this shady contract to let the federal government dump irradiated toxic waste in your town. So they would pay us $400 a month if we agreed. Our answer? Absolutely. By only July of our first year, we had driven ourselves to negative 4,000 simoleons. But with the help of the federal government, we reversed our downward financial trajectory and started making big money, $500 a month, and all just for staring at a radiation dump in the corner. Sure, it went on fire some of the time. Well, it went on fire most of the time, but we responded by building a fire department directly across the street from it, so that anytime there was a fire, we could put it out right away. Of course, the fire department was actually very expensive to run, at $125 a month, which cut into our profits. So in an act of financial brilliance, I decided to just stop funding it. Naturally, the firemen protested. So only when a fire occurred, I would fund the department. Then they would respond and put out the fire. Then when they got back to the fire station, I'd defund the department again. It was foolproof. Then they'd get back out their pickets and keep protesting again until the next fire, when we'd do it all over again. This was an amazing strategy at earning money, and at the same time keeping our toxic radiation dump safe and sound. And for the next 200 years, I repeated it over and over again until we had saved up $1 million. At which point, I decided it was time to start building our city. Honestly, very exciting. So I started laying the foundations, but I didn't really put much effort into it. To tell you the truth, I'm going to destroy this city to make more money, so don't get too attached here. But in the meantime, I built up the farms. I built up the residences. I even built up the water and the stupid infrastructure. When the citizens started rioting, I lowered taxes to 7.2%. People loved it, and our population skyrocketed from 0 to over 25,000 within just a few years of getting started. And for now, we could lean on all the money we had produced from our toxic waste dump to build up our city. My whole strategy revolves around getting our cash flows in the negative. So unfortunately, we started making money again by collecting too much in taxpayer money. I mean, I don't even think this is very fair in a $0 challenge, so I decided to just start lowering taxes again to 2%. You see, the true goal of my strategy was to get our cash flows into the red, because if you do this with enough population like I did, your accountant lady returns with more offers. Casino is an amazing attraction that freely generates 300 simoleons of tax revenue per month for $0 upkeep. We accepted, and we built it across the river, directly beside the toxic waste dump. I even built safe, sustainable wind turbines to power them and blow the radiation toward the gamblers. We still weren't getting enough offers, though. So then I did the unthinkable, and I lowered taxes in Loser City to 0% across the board. Then, to drive us even further into the red, I started building expensive schools and hospitals, intentionally driving us even further into the red. Naturally, my advisors scrambled. How would we feed the infrastructure? Of course, and right on time, sensing our financial bleed out, my accountant lady returned with more and even shadier offers. Evil Genius's secret base? $380 a month. We'll take it. Top security? Federal prison? $250 a month. Army training base? Slated for construction directly beside the evil villain's lair? $350 a month. Altogether, it added up to 1,780 simoleons a month of completely free income. Of course, we were hosting a parasitic island of radiation, gambling, convicted felons, an evil mastermind, and the army, but hopefully the problems would just stay over there. Hopefully. With all that free income, I just decided, you know what, it's time to blow up the whole city and start fresh. I'd made a pretty bad first impression, and I wanted to start over. The year was 2258. The ruins of old Loser City stretched out upon the yawning plains like modern-day Florida. Piles of trash, just all over the place. Exotic, sinister-looking wild animals roaming around. Nuclear test facilities, rampant gambling and tourism, and tanks patrolling the roads, all made possible by our amazing 0% income tax. So I decided to get started by building farms all over. That's good. Build wide, then we'll build tall. Okay, check. Now that the farms were done, I just had to tighten the budget up. After all, we didn't want to charge our farmers any money they didn't have or put them at financial need. But we'd also need people to farm those farms, so we carved out residences in their midst. You might notice that none of the infrastructure makes much sense. The roads look like crap, but that's just what you get for $0. Fortunately, it was cheap and affordable for our residents, which is important because they were all unemployed. No taxes, no road maintenance. Heck, you might have to climb out of your neighbor's yard just to get to the road. The one thing we did start investing was our fire department now. Gone were the days of picketing, protesting firemen, but only because fires were breaking out in the streets almost every single day. We kept it cheap enough to maintain that we were still making money. Though when people moved to Loser City, they usually didn't stay for long. After an unprecedented start full of rampant construction, almost everyone abandoned their homes, leaving only about 1,688 people living in the city. But at the very least, I can say that those people must have really liked it here. I decided that the few remaining citizens had a right to know how their unfortunate civic existences were being funded, so I constructed an expensive bridge across to the terrible island on the other side of the river. And upon further examination of the bad roads, I learned that almost all of the residents worked in the neighboring city, which is literally the tutorial. Embarrassing. So in an act of economic sovereignty and patriotism, I started constructing dirty factories for all the dirty residents of Loser City to work at. Commercial zones. They opened 40 copies of exactly the same place called Bennett Music Corp. And then they just abandoned all of them. This town sucks. Some people's houses are in other people's backyards. The fire department is crashing into the building with the fire and running people down on the way to extinguish it. We even had to open up another fire department across the street to just clean up the mess. Look, I don't like taxes as much as the next person, but I want to live. You know, I tried building a city with $0. I funded it by alternate means, and I tried to keep it cheap and affordable for the residents. But sometimes you just try to fly too high and too close to the sun. And that is why you should give up and accept yourself. think that's about it. I wanted to end on a positive note, so... Anyway, on August 27th, 2014, a YouTuber named Peter Ritchie posted a video of the largest SimCity ever created, the Megacity, totaling 107,658,254 residents in the span of one very, very large map, totaling 81 regions on a 9x9 grid. Colossal in its magnitude, and honestly, a work of art unto itself, all meticulously planned and sustained by over 16,000 miles of road, 324 hydrogen power plants, and 486 waste-to-energy plants. Each subcity is divided into 144 megablocks, 48 residential, 48 commercial, and 48 industrial, all arranged into what appears to be a plus sign centered by a massive commercial district. And this city is dense. To put it into perspective, if New York City is around 11,300 people per square kilometer, then the megacity is around 7 times more dense, coming in at around 80,000 people per square kilometer. Not even including planning and testing, the video details around 6 months worth of construction poured into this vast and elaborate megacity. I wanted to figure out how to create such a huge city for myself in SimCity, but without taking out 6 months of my life, so I decided to just figure it out this weekend by reconstructing one singular tile off the grid and see if I could manage it. If you divide the total regional population of 107 million by 81 for each tile, you should come out with an average population of around 1.3 million for each tile. But there's still a lot more that goes into it. And so I got cracking by trying to follow along with Peter Ritchie's video series about how to construct a mega city. January 1st, year 0, $500,000 in the bank, and a blank slate of grassland in the background. I commenced with the city in the far corner of the region, a little square tile on the southeast edge of the map. I sketched out my blueprints for the town with roads along the edges, and began, like every good SimCity, with industry in the corner to poop out all the dirty fumes off the map edges from the power plant situated as far southeast as possible. The first grid block. Thence, roads extended north and west to guide the rest of the city's plans. Blocked. The foundation was laid. After that, I gridded out the rest of the city with major roads and avenues, crisscrossing at vital intersections like a large piece of graph paper. And then I began to zone the zones: industrial, commercial, and of course, residential. For this first experiment, I placed everything out in a diagonal checkerboard fashion, which seemed like a good idea, but unfortunately, it wasn't a good idea. Oh well. The city grew anyway. And despite my attempts to encourage growth through the placement of water pipes, this city was ultimately doomed to fail almost immediately because the dirty smog pumped into the air by factories. It was so dirty that no one moved in, and demand died out. I also realized that the entire region of this zone was too small and I'd never really get the results I wanted, so I decided to just back out of the region immediately to establish another experimental city nearby. Let's just forget that city number 1 ever happened. We have its population sitting there and breathing in the smog as proof of its results. City number 2. With Mega City number 1 sitting there in the background, let's just forget about it for now, and we're going to embark on a new city with another $500,000 in the bank. Everything's reset again at January 1st, year 0. The only catch this time is that this city is going to have a slightly higher demand due to all the already established or possibly displaced population from this first city we established. I begin with the second city in exactly the same way as the first city. Roads along the edges, industry beside it on the map edge, and in the corner, a factory to poop pollution out somewhere else and make it other people's problem. After all, ain't nobody got time for that. With water, power, and factories, we need workers to support the local economy. So I built some houses nearby for our population, as well as commercial zones nearby, but this time farther away from the smog of the factories. Also, they'd have a chance to grow, unabated by dirty pollution. The city grew, but everyone inside was an idiot. They all worked at mindless manual labor jobs in factories and never gazed upon the light of the sun. And even when I backed out into the major region of the game to establish more ties to residential developments and industries in other areas of the greater map region, all they demanded were jobs on the farm. subsisting by the lactate of the bovine. Even when I covered the entirety of the city limits and farms, no one moved in or seized any opportunities at forward career advancement or education. And so, as a result, our population remained a city of dinguses, inbred swine of the earth. Sometimes even literally. I'd messed up pretty bad, so I decided to just blow up the region. And I didn't tell you about them, but I also made 2 other cities in the area which also failed, but they were just full of farms, so you can safely ignore them. Goodbye. Okay, so if Megacities 1 and 2 didn't work, and also Megacities 3 and 4 didn't work either, then what about the next one? Starting fresh from January year 0, it's all back to the beginning once again, with $500,000 in the bank. I'd learned my lessons from the first few failures, so I started off this 3rd time with my newfound wisdom, all directed toward building the ultimate megacity. Perfect in every way. Build wide, then build tall. We started off with a nice balance of residential, commercial, and of course industrial zones, and just perhaps a few farms to support the local economy while we diversified our labor market, all to prevent the hazardous potential inbreedification of these first Sims living in the megacity. With water and power hooked up, the whole city grew and increased, supporting more farms, but this time only along the outer edge, all as I created a buffer toward the juicy interior of the city for the people to reside and do commerce with one another, making merry and experiencing gaiety, unabated by the smog of the dirty factories nearby this time. To combat the seeping in of any potential stupidity looming on the horizon, perhaps, of our agricultural culture, we established our first learning location, the elementary school, a place to prevent morons from conquering the town. This worked. Naturally, people desired to offload the daily burden of their stupid children at our school, and residential demand exploded as migrants flocked into our town to send their offspring to our public school. As we sat them in groups of children in our classrooms, they grew smarter. Naturally, as the children began to grow older in our schools, they desired a life now this time not on the farm, but instead in a factory, growing yet more demand in the macroeconomic industrial growth and expanding the way for the city to make more money, with more housing for taxpayers. So as the megacity grew from years 50 to 100, factories began to replace farms as tax revenues rose along with them, allowing the zoning of yet more residential areas for people to live in, more elementary schools to encourage them to work in the factories we just built, and gradually enough room to construct residences for the middle class and wealthy, farther away from the smog of the factories, reaping yet even greater returns on their higher income in taxes. The plan for our megacity, like with most SimCities, was to make money from the factories to pave way for a cleaner, wealthier society. Thus, by raising taxes on dirty industry to 11% and higher, we made money on them gradually and began to edge them out of our borders, allowing us to lower taxes on the residents and encourage more of them to move in, funding elementary schools and raising the bar to higher achievement of sitting in classrooms, along with the creation of a manufacturing sector which produced greater income and lesser air pollution. Not gonna lie though, this took a lot of time, 150 years so far to be a little more precise, and in that time we had no police, and we had to keep just bulldozing the oil power plants every 25 years or so because they were on the verge of a meltdown. But these were just the sacrifices that needed to be made to improve our society, like simply tolerating the rampant spread of violent and unspeakable crimes throughout the city for hundreds of years, as well as air and water pollution, just like all over the place, as well as an almost complete disregard for human life and lack of healthcare services, all as we gradually amassed a growing hoard of gold and taxpayer revenues. But you can't deny, things were getting a little bit better every year. From years 160 to 200, it's busy, busy, busy. We kept growing and gradually implemented almost every possible community ordinance to make our town more attractive to migrants, from carpool incentives to tire recycling programs and beyond. hauling in more people and more taxpayer dollars, accumulating, expanding, all the while continuing to edge out and profit from the last dregs of dirty industry with a punishing 15% tax rate as we became clean, pristine, wealthy, and perfect in every way. By the year 233, our population crested 100,000, 200,000, and growing higher with more cash in the bank. 7 million and counting. The city continued to grow, and by the year 250, we were starting to use the megacity's planned plaza configuration, combined with subway stops to encourage the commuting and upliftification of the rising towers of our growing population. This took a while again to keep growing, but by the year 350 we were fully gridded and up to 350k pop with 10 million in the bank. We continued to expand for the next 60 years, realizing the full grid of our plan and covering the whole town in developments. With taxes higher, though, and still stuck at 400k pop, we were still struggling to get our demographics maximized. How could we keep improving? Fire stations, education, gentrification, you name it. We even built a country club in the middle of town. Churches, cemeteries, a university, you name it. Every special gift that had been granted to the town for the last 350 years that we hadn't built yet. I bulldozed the oil power plants and replaced them with hydrogen power plants. I even schnizzled the schnonk. Still not good enough, but improving, 450k pop and rising. So around the year 400, with all the traditional means of civic governance proving unreliable and running out of options in the traditional toolbox for addressing the threats of crime and dirty industry still stifling the growth of our town, I turned to martial law and just blew up every dirty industry in the town. If you're dirty, you're gone. One by one, they fell to our bulldozers, and to prevent them from returning, I raised their tax rate to 20% to make way for cleaner, wealthier, high-tech industries to move in and take their place. Be gone, peasants! Taking another look at the map, though, I realized I hadn't actually set up the zones correctly, so it took a total redevelopment of the city's zones until year 405 to actually get everything set up the right way. At long last, the expansion was complete. Sure, maybe we were down 100,000 people or so, and maybe we had a negative $40,000 per month net cash flow, but, oh well, let's just ignore that and lower taxes. And although we'd lost money and people in the short term, like a business primed with startup capital, I'm happy to say that from around year 400 onward, people flocked in droves to the megacity, attracted by lower taxes, better civil services, and the start to a blossoming high-tech industrial sector. At this point in the playthrough commenced one of those most magical moments in any SimCity playthrough. That epiphany when you finally solved the equation of the perfect civic enterprise. The zones are perfect. The fire departments, the police stations, and all the services are in place, and you can just click 3 times speed and kick back as you watch the towers rise and materialize. The result of all those meticulous hours spent planning, shaping into a bustling civilization before your very eyes. And this time, that's actually what happened. The tax revenues went from deep in the red to well into the black as our population rose along with it steadily. 500,000, 600k, 700k, and 800k by around the year 500. The towers rose and the entire city leveled up. And honestly, there's no bad ending, which is odd because usually everything explodes or everyone dies at the end, but that didn't happen this time. Or did it? Well, it didn't, but to get technical, Peter Ritchie's megacity contained over 1 million people per square tile on average, and mine had only 800,000, which is still missing a lot, but keep in mind this is the first tile. From scratch, we're starting with the demand. But if you really wanted to make this region with 107 million total population, the aggregate demand from all the other regions combined would probably carry the population higher from region to region. I feel pretty satisfied. I got the map full of skyscrapers I'd always wanted, and there it is, Mega City 1. Good enough. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. I'm Ambiguous Amphibian. I hope this convinced you to try this out for yourself, and a major thanks to my patrons, dinguses who schnizzle my schnonk. Until next time,
In 2009, an architecture student by the online handle ImperRV completed an experiment in SimCity 3000 that would forever go down in history as the largest and most interesting urban sprawl ever created in the history of the game. Dubbed Magnasanti, a staggering metropolis of over 6 million population, far beyond a game save file, that's a boundary-pushing work of art and careful engineering to perfectly optimize the game's parameters, revealing what some have considered a horrifying Orwellian impression of the dystopian mechanics that undergird SimCity. And one might extend that to the natural laws that govern the growth and dynamics of real-life cities in urban design. The project was carried out with such robust testing and clout that outlets like Polygon and even the Museum of Modern Art covered the hellish metropolis in their own videos and articles about the project. It's the ultimate design I always tried to create as a youngster when I would play the original SimCity on Super Nintendo, and to be quite frank, I was envious of the amount of blood, sweat, and math that were poured into this project. I had to find out more. The original game files are available for download if you own SimCity 3000 and want to see it for yourself. So before I try to recreate it, what is Magnasanti? Let's break it down into its constituent components. Every city needs transportation. In Magnasanti, there are no roads, but rather a grid-like arrangement of rippling underground subway stations radiating out from the city center. There are no schools or hospitals, but only a never-ending string of the same library, funded with literally $0, and maximally funded police stations to achieve order, control, and maximum population density. Magnasantians are exceptionally stupid people, entirely uneducated, and no one survives past the age of 55. Zoning is baffling, but it makes sense, I guess. Every other block repeats the same alternating pattern of commercial, residential, and industrial zones, optimized to ensure there's little pollution and lots of people. Despite the lack of roads and cars, the paid parking industry is still booming, and every single commercial square in the city is inhabited by a large 2x2 parking garage, situated between 10 other parking garages, all of which lead to nowhere, no streets. But somehow, popular demand keeps calling for more of them, and business is booming. What else is there to say? It's basically Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. The city has $6 billion, or simoleons, if you're really trying to sound cultured, and it took 50,000 years to complete it. But one can only imagine that for ImperRV, it took much longer to puzzle out exactly how to engineer the foundation of this monstrosity. So, after much doo-doo flinging and overly involved analysis, I decided to see if I could use the famous design as a model for myself, and achieve the same or similar results in less than 50,000 years. What would my own personal version of hell look like? Forget everything you know. The year is 1900, and we'll be starting with coal power, one of the most advanced forms of energy production known to man. I didn't want to cheat myself in the money, so I decided to earn cash the old-fashioned way, by attracting people in, then taxing the heck out of them to keep evolving my city into its final form. The main question SimCity asks the player is this: where are you going to put all of your garbage? To which the only appropriate answer is yes. Of course, you need to pollute if you want to start generating money, but better somewhere else than over here. It was very nice in here. It wasn't long before our new city was zoned up and generating oodles of dollars every fiscal quarter, 10,000 simoleons, cash. In surprisingly short order, it seemed that we had already maxed out our RCI meter, even after I had surrounded the city with pollution, giving it to other people. What was the meaning of this? So in response to tepid growth, I funded a campaign to remove funding from all the local libraries. Demand for the stupid libraries catalyzed a watershed moment, and residential demand soared once again. Thus, through the construction of libraries designed for our dumb population, we grew our numbers without raising our expenses. In my probing of the seamy underbelly of the formulas for the governing dynamics in SimCity, this was the first anomaly where I would say that things were seriously out of whack. If the government is an agent that desires only more taxpayers, no matter how stupid and unhappy they are, then this was the first area set in my sights. So the years passed. 1900, 2000, we seized the new millennium poised for growth.
If I couldn't hit pay dirt immediately, I'd have to call upon everything I'd learned as a SimCity player to mold the dystopian utopia of my dreams. Pollution to the sides, keep the people in the middle, prevent them from escaping. Commercial zones blend the two in a continuous spectrum of urban hues. And so in every city, there's actually a tale of two cities. The first one that pollutes and taxes rampantly in order to fund the next generation, where you can afford cleaner, cheaper energy and build on the labors of the fathers. For me, this meant an outer city of roads, my first city, while I made inroads toward my own personal Magnasanti, starting with the subway tunnels that led to the urban center of my second city, containing a primary transit hub that would be the heart of our new metropolis. Like a cancerous parasite that ultimately takes on the likeness of its host, the new city reached outward and engulfed the outer-lying lowlands in an assertion of its dominance, bleeding the old city of taxes and population until the former was merely a shadow of its lofty towers. Rise, Magnasanti. Rise out of the ashes of your former shell and become everything you're supposed to be. After major development, I created a tapestry of zoning nearly identical to the original. Still, I was nowhere near 6 million population. Even with half the city zoned, we remained stuck at a paltry 100,000 pop, with half the storefronts opened, then immediately abandoned. We had to buff up those numbers or else die in the cradle. So after decades of collecting a few $100s a year, despite our mistakes, we managed to carve out subway connections to attract migrants from nearby towns and build up a strip of 3x3 dense industrial zones, opening the floodgates to growth. A watershed moment where our population doubled to 200K. And then the dam burst. After the explosion of the power plants, we ousted the cadres of established families that had been hoarding up all the land. I'm not kidding you. After massive blackouts and an exodus, what followed was the Great Migration into New Magnasanti. A baby boom. By blowing up our power plants, we flexed on nearby towns that we were not afraid of pain, leading kindred spirits their way into our borders to be fruitful and multiply. Memorizing this zoning pattern took forever, but it became my mantra in tirelessly planning the city as de facto, immortal emperor mayor forever through the next 3 centuries. We passed 500,000 and beyond, but with almost the entire city zoned, we remained stuck at only 600,000 or 700,000. What was holding us back from our full potential? There's no I in team, but there is an I in city. I had forgotten what was the most important, that my people didn't actually matter. The city was actually losing money every year in my efforts to lay that foundation. I came close to quitting here. To be fair, I had actually come very close to recreating the physical zones, identical to the original Magnasanti, but there was still more work to do. We raised taxes and passed 1 million population. Then I did what any other self-respecting SimCity player would do. I left my computer running, and I went to the grocery store while my tax bureau leached the population for unfathomable hordes of wealth for the next 100 years. When I returned, like magic, we were rich, and all it had required was a century of complete neglect. I don't know Emperor V. Omnica, but I do know this. That man should be invited into Mensa. For 600 years, we watched the population grow, removing one obstacle at a time that prevented our people from reproducing and filling up that hopeful metropolis. I did everything I could. An interlacing citywide law enforcement-themed Venn diagram composed of the radii of each of my police headquarters, completely dismantling crime. Hundreds of post-apocalyptic libraries filled with books that no one would ever read, but somehow kept a constant stream of migrants incoming. Maxed out the transit funding, and even a subway and rail connection on literally every tile of the map. Multiple neighbor agreements to fully utilize every square inch of real estate, sanitizing the water, building parks in the center. I had done literally every possible thing to make my city just as good, and yet I was a SimCity failure. But the underlying capital T truth is this. The greatest joy I get is probing that black box of underlying formulas that govern the growth and dynamics of a city. It's not about the result, but the story that got me there. That was when the fires began, and the free thinkers returned to Magnasanti to set that prison of a metropolis ablaze in an infernal welcome for the next generation. Something moving, something with errors, something that it's a joy to puzzle and ponder over for hours and hours. There are few games out there that inspire more creativity than SimCity. I fondly remember my 11-year-old self struggling to balance a budget and grow a city on the Super Nintendo, failing but always coming back twice as diligent the next time. The franchise ignited a love for architecture, design, and planning in me as a youngster. And still to this day, legendary game designer Will Wright's bizarre and wonderful universe, dark and hilarious in its world design, are one of my fondest gaming memories. I was wondering if I'd gotten any better many years later, so I decided to undertake the creation of a megalopolis, the goal of the original SimCity in 100 years of urban development. The world begins at year zero with natural disasters. There were so many absurd and ridiculous ways to torture the denizens of your city that somehow brought me great joy as a child, and I used it liberally to get the creative juices flowing. For the beginning of our city is where I have the most anxiety. It's where I would always fail as a kid, and you can make the most mistakes, those which will reverberate out into the rest of your city's history. Rightopia. No city can exist without power, and so before we begin zoning this monstrosity of a civilization, we need a cheap way of getting started. It's coal power for now, but we'll move on to that bougie wind power later on, where to put the coal power plant that poisons our air and water, leeching away the life of our children. Of course, on the very edge, the city limits of Wrightville, right near the people of Audianapolis, just outside of Indianapolis. I dislike both cities and their people. Wrightville is born. We zone more factories to send our pollution their way, some farms, a commercial district with a bunch of scammy car dealerships. That's all we can really afford right now. And then our housing. Ah, the fresh new feeling of a zoned city, ready to move in. And wowzers, we've spent a lot of money on all this zoning. The year is 0 AD. Population, 0. We've just completed our zoning and it takes everyone, not gonna lie, about 4 months to move in. Yeesh. The first developments are humble. Little factories, impoverished hovels, an orange grove. We have no education at all. Everyone is a dingus. But despite our dingusness, we get started anyway, because nothing ever gets started just by talking. Year 0 and we hit the ground running. Housing developments. Some among you would be inclined to call it a rural backwater. I shudder to say, you wouldn't see the roaring demand waiting to be fulfilled by our developers. As if overnight, suburbia sprang up. More housing, agriculture. The first year ended. Our 60,000 simoleon investment was finally putting those taxpayer dollars back into our pocket. Droves of new families relocated to our town. Most of them were, to be fair, uneducated, willfully stupid ignoramuses, but they were Rightopians, and Rightopian means growth. And if you don't take my word for it, just look at our cows, literally materializing out of nothing in order to join our town. Unfortunately, Rightopians were not the smartest. Intensely dense people. The whole town was rampant with dumb. So we constructed an elementary school and a high school to try to beat the stupid out of them. Scholars walked in the parking lots. Rightopia was finally growing, but only under the watchful vigilance of a frugal mayor, willing to slash school budgets to ensure the continued financial appreciation of the town. Crime was scarce, but apparently being committed randomly in beet fields. And of a sudden, the town's residents grew smarter, attracting wealthier neighbors and necessitating the urban transformation of farmlands into factories. The waltz of progress is lopsided, and we continually switch back and forth from residential project to industrial project, ever reaching higher with continued investments in the brains of our people. Those first 10 years of our city's existence, we were finally shaking off the plight of stupid from our people and paving the way for a new upwardly mobile path toward metropolis. I'm not gonna lie, I'm not the neatest urban planner, but what I lacked in polish, I made up for in chutzpah. The truth is that the more you can do to attract those juicy taxpayer dollars, the more you're willing to cram them in there, even if that means bringing them in with 4 copies of the same pizzeria on one block. But for now, the car dealerships were the scammiest. The lawyers, the shadiest, and the entire government structure horribly corrupt. Do you have what it takes to grow a literal mountainside to a sprawling development of tens of thousands? It takes a shrewd businessman to trick this many people into doing something. And so the pigeons flooded to our town, poor drivers and all, shining citadel of hope. Cram 'em in there. That was our city motto. We had hospitals, or as I like to call them, hootspitals, hootspacopters. Our city was truly turning into something awesome. Water treatment plant, air pollution, water pollution, particulate poisoning, rampant crime, cram 'em in there. That was the name of the ball game for those first 30 years or so. Even if my advisors scorned me, because I'm such a great, selfless person, I decided to go to any lengths, even if that meant leveling entire city blocks to do what was necessary for the greater good of the town. We established a water system and went hard on dirty bad industry. If your industry was too dirty for our city, too bad. We would simply demo the entire building after it was built, workers inside, to send a message to any more dirty bad industry money men of the world that they were not welcome here in our town. We even raised taxes on them to keep them out, and it seemed they kept coming back. But after we surrounded the coal power plant with parks, it seemed we were starting to attract the types of manufacturing and high-tech industries that would actually help our population and make real progress. When traffic was rampant and my advisors were livid, I leveled 40 city blocks without any prior notice or warning. But I wasn't about to let red tape or regulation get in the way of improving the city. Alternate solutions were sought. An entire city block of unemployed people? Simply threaten them with eviction, and to repave their homes with more car dealerships if they don't get work within a couple of hours. That was our other city motto: work or else. Naturally, there eventually came growing pains. Around mid-century, we had used up all the available space on our one plot of land. Where to go next? Of course, the obvious solution was staring at us in the face: drink the ocean. We embarked at once about the exorbitantly expensive process of replacing all of the water with land. Ultimately, my best decision as mayor, and the one for which I'll doubtlessly be remembered for a long time to come: Earth is flat. Don't question it. I'm not saying that the entire original city was just a ploy to collect taxpayer dollars in order to pave the way for the actual city once I realized that I had made many grave errors. But let's be honest, if you were playing, this is the point at which any normal person would have simply started a new town. Rightopia was somehow different. I doubled down, moving my mayor's house smack dab in the middle of my new developments. A grid of avenues for the new oceanless town where I would oversee the developments. Celebration was had with fireworks. I erected a statue of myself across the street from my home. Erected. Admirers gathered at the new country club. The new grid-based town model was far superior in design to the old, and so it grew that there was a tale of two Rightopias, one of the lowlands and the other of highlands. Which one would ultimately reign supreme? And so as evidence of the low town's superior design became increasingly evident, I began leveling the rest of the town, block by block, to force the old citizens to conform to the mold of the new town. Join or die, literally, or we will bulldoze over your home and bury you in a mound of dirt hundreds of feet below for the foundation of the new city. This was a very persuasive argument. The citizens of Indianapolis nearby were already ahead of us with this model of urban design, and we would not be outdone. My advisors, all of them, scorned me with the lowest of contempt. They said it couldn't be done. Raise taxes. We would level this mountain and build a megalopolis, or literally die on this hill trying. I would not be trifled with, even if Fire Chief Sam Armstrong kept slightly dabbing on me intimidatingly. And so we continued about the process of suggesting that our citizens relocate, because we suspected their properties might be located above a sinkhole. Doo-doo was flung, taxes were raised, neighborhoods were gentrified, then rezoned as a subtle flex on their inhabitants to squeeze them into selling their homes before we changed the character of the neighborhood. Taxes were raised even more doo-doo was flung, and these funds were used to bulldoze the very neighborhoods from which they were collected. But unfortunately, the timer had run up on our little experiment. I couldn't believe it. By the year 99, we had reached a population of 120,000. Unfortunately, not impressive at all, because a megalopolis is 500,000 Sims. Haha. SimCity is still exactly the way I remember it, after nearly 20 years. And it's probably one of the quirkiest franchises, whose original games really inspire a lot of what I enjoy about gaming to this day.